Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. So inshallah we'll be going through logic. Inshallah. So it's not about exercise at home, so it's not the normal setup. So we have a bit of edges exposed or whatever, but inshallah I'll be able to do the job inshallah. Okay, so what is logic? So sometimes people have a whole logic is some kind of like Mantiq, like this kind of like mystical science, what it's all about. Someone goes, Mantiq is teach you how to lie properly. Yeah? So like you need to understand what logic, what it's really about, and how practical it is, and why it was so emphasized by the scholars of the past. Okay, so basically there are three things, right? Well, there are three things. And that's it. There's three different things we need to understand. The first is concept. So like, how does human beings communicate, right? So for example, we got this. What's that? How do you know how to train? Have you seen that thing before? It's a whole long philosophical thing. Like, how can can human beings extract meaning? It's a whole long. I'm not going to go too deep, but basically, it's called this. This thing has an idea in your mind, and this is called a train. That's it. So the first thing is basically understanding how a human being, or we have ma'ani, meanings and concepts in our minds, and for those meanings we have words. That's the first thing. So concepts and how we produce these. I'm not going deep into philosophical thing, but just basically that's the first thing you have here. Ticket. I said, so what's this? What's that? Ticket. Good enough job. Now, what you never seen this ticket before, have you? But a human being, like we can extract concepts. We can extract. I think that's the whole more philosophical. But the whole idea is we are able to categorize things. We are able to name things, and by this we can pass on knowledge and we can discuss things. So the first thing is we have concepts. Yes, that's clear. The second thing is judgment. Like you put two or more concepts together to make a statement. So for example, I have a ticket. It's a judgment, a statement, a fact. You get it? So initially the first is like a single, we're able to categorize things, label things, name things. The second thing is we then put judgment on these things. We are able to then put a hukam, a ruling. Whether it's true or false is irrelevant. Well, it's relevant, but not this moment. But we put a ruling. I have a ticket. Another judgment is what? Whoever has a ticket can board the train or plane or whatever. You got it? So far so good? The judgment, isn't it? So we have single words, single units of words. How do we do these single units of words? We can put them to make past sentences and make a judgment regarding them. And the third thing we do in Mantiq is reasoning. So the concepts put together make what? A judgment, or statements, or information. We put those in. We structure those information in a systematic way. We come with one conclusions. So basically, the logic is: I have a ticket. So we know what train is. We know what ticket is. We know what boarding is. We know all that kind. We know entitlement. But we have this basic thing of train, ticket, concepts. Then we have the two statements which we assume to be true. I have a ticket, and a person who has a ticket can board the train. So now we know from this make our own deduction. Therefore, I can board the train. Yes, that's basically what it is. We have single units of words. We put these words together, put statements, and then these statements come together to form what? We use these to form arguments. And that's the three sections of Mantiq. Nothing more. Obviously, each of these has a lot more detail. And I give you examples here now. So when we have concepts and ideas, we use words for these. And these are called what? Terms. So the first thing we have is terms. That's why, for example, you have when we say, let's come to terms. Like, let us agree what these words mean. Right? It's very obvious, but you know what? When you have like debates on that, it's like, are you even understanding what you're using? People are using a word, and you're not even using the word in the same way. So like, you can't even have a conversation. So like, for example, I'm not going to go too deep, but like, for example, some people say, well, like there's some people who don't like Mantiq, who don't like logic, and say, well, it's irrational. You don't need terms. They kind of misunderstand what they say by terms. So sometimes like, you don't need to like define everything. Little child, we've never said a toy is a definition, but they've understood what toy is, isn't it? That's why we say, why are you playing with that? Is that a toy? They said no, it's not a toy. How do you know it's not term? They have a definition, isn't it? But they got rough idea, isn't it? But sometimes it becomes very important technically. In law, in fiqh, in discussions, in debate. Like for example, if you say, well, what's a bid'ah? Well, we have to define it properly. Then we can discuss it. You get what I'm saying? So so many people, we don't have to go around defining every single thing. Because like, a car, we know what a car is, we know what a truck is, we know what a van is, we know what food is. But sometimes it does become important, especially when it comes to more technical discussions. Do you understand? So when it comes to technical discussions, especially in fiqh, in aqidah, in law, in politics, in discussions, in all of these things, I'll give you examples of it later when we go to terms, inshallah, how it's very, very important terms. It's not just like, just a passive argument, or just like okay, something that in the air, that we make up terms and this discuss. No, it's actually very, very important. It affects our law, it affects our aqidah, it affects our fiqh, all of these things. Okay, so these are terms. So a single thing that when we have the idea, we can extract meaning. We can group things together, like all trains. We can group them together, or human beings can put it into one word. We have a term for that. It's called a term. And then when we put statements together, these are called propositions. Yes, and then this is called an argument. That's not an argument. This is basically, it's not really an argument. This is actually what we will say here. This is the result of the argument. You get what I'm saying? So this, we put these two statements together to make an argument. That's the result of the argument. Do you understand? Making sense? How simple? So let's look at here. Abdullah is a Muslim. So in here, what is Abdullah? Abdullah is a term. The word Muslim is what? Another term. And then if you come out here and we say, well, I'm not familiar with this compared to my screen, but this becomes what now? What's that whole thing? Judgment. A judgment or a proposition. Correct. So we know here we have two terms. The term Abdullah is defined to one person. Then we have the concept of Muslim. And then we put it together. There's a Muslim, that's a proposition, a statement. Yes, a judgment. So we're putting a judgment of Muslim on Abdullah. Then we have another statement, another proposition. Muslim believe in one God. So now we have here another proposition. Now we can put two or more propositions together to do what? Make an argument. Argument doesn't mean fighting. When you say argument, you think shouting. Yeah, but in Mantiq and logic, argument means using known facts to establish or try to prove unknown facts. You following? So if you have these two premises, so also say again a lot of times you have a statement, a judgment. It's also called a premise. But we do that later. So these two statements, we put it together. We can come to a third. We can come to an argument. We can argue. What can we argue? What can we argue from here? Allah believes in one God. So So if you look at it here, now if you go over here, I put it all together. We say, look, now, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. We can say, for example, here. We can say here, this is an argument. Is it working? Nope. Yeah, it works. We can say this is an argument. So we have terms. We put the terms together to make what? A proposition or a statement, or we learn all those words later on. To send it together. And we have two known factors, 1 and 2. And we put these two together to come to make an argument for a third. This is basically all it is. But obviously, you can get multiple statements together to make compound arguments. Argue 1 to B, for example, Abdullah believes in one God. So therefore, and another statement is, whoever believes in one God will enter Jannah. So therefore, Abdullah will enter in Jannah. So you have like multiple things come together, inshallah. You understand? So it's basic. Now let's get another argument. Abdul Rahman is a Muslim. We have what? Terms come together to make what? Make a proposition. And a Muslim is a terrorist. So what was our conclusion? Abdul Rahman is a terrorist. Now, the issue here, what's the issue in this one here? The issue here now, so the argument flows logically. But the problem is in the data. That this statement here is not necessarily, we don't agree with this statement. This is a unfounded premise. That's our argument. But the terms are clear. Abdul Rahman is the term clear. Muslim is clear. You can argue the word terrorist because you could say, well, define terrorist and what is terrorist. You can say, well, this term needs to be defined clearly. How do you define a terrorist? Nelson Mandela was a terrorist one time. Now he's a national hero, a worldwide hero. So you can have all these arguments. We can say terms. The term is very important. And then, so the argument is correct, but the information or the data input into this argument is not correct. So obviously you get incorrect conclusion. All nuns wear a scarf. True? Yeah? Meaning when they go out, etc. And Amina wears a scarf. Is that true? Yeah? Why are you laughing? What's the conclusion? Amina's a nun. Yeah? True? No, why is that not true? See now, here, this one we can come to the conclusion that it's not true because we know like the answer. We know like because we know Amina, we know scarf, we know nun, and we know something is wrong here. But sometimes if we don't know these terms, the structure of the argument can lead to incorrect conclusions, arguments. So we have two correct premises. Nuns wear a scarf, Amina wears a scarf, but the way we've something. So we know it's wrong because we know that it's not true because we have the answer. We know the answer is not correct. But sometimes we don't have known information or things that are obvious to us. So we have to analyze out, well, why does this argument not make sense? We know it doesn't make sense, but we can't pinpoint it. That's what sometimes logic, you don't even, sometimes like logic, is this all like natural, like intuition? Some people have intuitive, like this is wrong. But sometimes you can't pinpoint like where it's gone wrong. So what logic would do is basically, it would help you basically understand where the mistake is being made. Or you can, and if it's not obvious like this, you can actually let's sit down and think about it. Then know what? This is a fallacy you're making. It's a mistake you're making. Do you understand? Okay. Okay. What starts with E and ends with an E and only has one letter? Envelope. I'm so sorry. We're not a joke. Yeah, I'm not funny anymore. Okay. So what happens here? Envelope. Now, what's the problem in here? Like, for example, obviously it's a joke, but what's happening in here? What's the problem? Like, it's a joke, and the jokes only make sense because it's not true. But where's the problem coming about? The word letter. The word letter is not being used, like, you're confusing the word letter. Because letter, when you're speaking about letter in the context, it starts with E, ends with E, you're talking about letters about the alphabetical letters. And when you say the word only has one letter, what are you talking about here now? A document, was one document. So the word letter is being used loosely. So obviously it's a joke, but this happens at other places as well. So if I give you a similar, we'll do it later on, but for example, we have the word bid'ah. So obviously any bid'ah is what? Is dalala. The Prophet clearly, every bid'ah is a dalala. Umar radiallahu said what? Tarawih is a bid'ah. So then obviously what's the conclusion then? Tarawih is what? So every bid'ah is what? Misguidance. And Tarawih is a bid'ah. So therefore Tarawih is what? Misguidance. But is the Prophet used the word bid'ah the same as Umar used the bid'ah? Radiallahu ta'ala. So now again, you have the same word sometimes, but it's not used correctly. So all of these things, it's obvious, but it's just sometimes just codifying to make sure that you make the obvious known. Like for example, like the Arabs, like they didn't need to, like Imam Malik didn't go and learn Nahw and Sarf. They knew Nahw and Sarf. Like that was like they just learned it. So when people are trained in intelligence and they don't, like, you don't have to go through. You can tell this is something wrong, but sometimes if you have fixed terms, I can explain to you what the problem is in one word. There's a fallacy of equivocation. You know straight away what the problem is. There's a fallacy illicit conversion. You know what the problem is here in this discussion. So when we have these terms, we understand, like we use the terms of Mantiq and logic, we can see straight away where the mistake is being made in the thing. So this comes in handy in everywhere. So let's discuss that later, inshallah. So why do you say logic? Why do you say logic? Like, for example, we do fractions, right? Fractions. Now, fractions come. What is fraction comes in the Quran? Inheritance. So okay, this directly helps. What if you percentages? Is percentage in the Quran? But like, is it wrong to learn percentages? Why? It's just going to help you in like something else. And it's like, it's another way of doing something. Like Egyptology. What's Egyptology? Come on, Egyptology. Yeah, when we study, like, for example, like the pharaohs and the pyramids and the history of Egypt and all that kind of stuff. Now, is that Islamic? But if you learned about it, what would it benefit you? How? You get an idea of, okay, you get some benefits in it, like, okay, which pharaohs they're talking about, which era they're talking about, where was these palaces located. It gives you better understanding of the verses of pharaoh and really what happened. It gives you better understanding. Even, for example, like biblical studies, like, okay, things that happen in the Bible, how does it contradict the Quran? Well, how does the Quran differ from their version of the stories, where they made errors? We get a bigger picture. So some of these things, they're not necessarily like, but it helps give a bigger picture. Like embryology, it's not Islamic, is it? But if you know a bit about embryology, you know a bit about these things, you know a bit about science, the heavens, the earth, all this like science, then it helps you understand different verses better. The same thing with Mantiq. It's basically there to make sure when you're thinking, so when you for example, it's even Mantiq links up a lot with usul al-fiqh as well, certain places, that you understand, okay, I'm trying to derive something, am I making sense of my derivation? I'm arguing for something, is my argument flawed? So that's all. It's not, forget where it come from, all that kind of stuff. I know that people like, there's people who argue against it, it's like un-Islamic, and it's not this, and it's wrong, and it causes, just look at it, like go through this, we do the whole thing, and if you think it's nonsense, if you think it's irrelevant or it's harmful, then don't do it. Then you say, well, this is nonsense. But if you just do it properly, and somebody there's like, this kind of video that Fulan wrote a book about Rad al-Mantiq. Okay, fine. So have you read it? And have you analyzed it to say, well, no, actually, he's got some points are valid, some invalid. Or just send a video to like, oh, Fulan Sheikh said that it's against it. So you're sending a video as an illogical or irrelevant argument, because if you send me a video saying that Fulan Sheikh, a link saying Fulan Sheikh said that Mantiq is not good or it's useful or a waste of time, whatever. So basically your argument is basically Fulan Sheikh said this, everything this Sheikh says is correct, so therefore, so is that your argument? So I'm not saying that, but that's what you're saying. So you need to learn Mantiq to make sure that you don't get the wrong arguments as well. So you need to study it. It's very important. And that's why, for example, classically, if you look at, for example, classically Christians, Muslims, they've all had this in things. If you don't understand how to think clearly, how to argue clearly, then what happens is that you get all weird stuff. And that's why, like, nowadays, one of the problems is that, like, people like have all these lot of courses, but they start studying a lot of things quickly. But the fundamental sciences, we don't spend a lot of time on those. If you're looking like Deoband and Dars Nizami, originally spent a lot of time on these, like, and it's called a trivium. So like if you sometimes like before that people study this properly, you see what it is like, for example, nowadays we say, okay, well, this is useless, because what happens, we put a value on we call it I don't know the right word, utilitarianism. Basically, what can bring you benefit in this world, like give you a job, earn you money, like so engineering, plumbing, electrics, all that kind of stuff. These things, logic, grammar, rhetoric, what these will do is it will train you to become a better person, meaning mentally, not spiritually, but mentally. You're able to, for example, if you look at it, like, even anywhere you go, look at Prime Minister's questions, it's like, this is like a bunch of madmen. I'm not doing it on purpose to avoid the question, but it's like, there's no logic. You look at, like, football commentary, like, you don't even have logic in the way you guys talk, because you just don't even know what you're talking about. Like, what you're arguing about is like, is this, like, and it happens, and then you go to YouTube, people are having debates. It's like, the fundamentals are not there to understand, like, your grammar is not correct, or you don't understand the balagha, you don't understand how languages work, you don't understand the logic, the argument, how to think. It's like, so all of these things are very, very important. And if you look, for example, it's not only things everywhere. They can, and if you look in the classical books originally when Deoband was founded, it has many books in Mantiq, because why? It trains the mind. That's what what's Miftahul Ulum mean? Literally, key of knowledge. So this is Sakaki. So Miftahul Ulum is basically the keys to knowledge. So this trivium is the same thing. Trivium means it's a key. So if you study language properly, if you study Nahwa, Sarf, Balagha, Mantiq, rhetoric, and then if you go a bit further, Usul Hadith, Usul Fiqh, what happens? You are then able to access all of the sciences. Like, for example, if you don't know Arabic properly, you can never do Quran translation. You can do Quran translation, like stories and all that. But what's the actual Arabic text? You're not able to figure out the Arabic text properly. You're just translating. You don't understand the alif lam. Is it jins? Is it ahad? Is it istighraq? Is it min? Is it zaida? Is it bayaniya? Is it ibtidaiya? All these small technicalities. You can say the basababiyya. What is it for? It's all of these small technicalities in sarf. And so in this book, if you go to this book here, Miftahul Ulum, it's a classic. Everybody study this. Why? The same thing. It's a key to all these sciences. If you study all of these sciences, especially this one, Mantiq, it opens up your way to think. So you understand, okay, when we're having a discussion in Quduri or Fiqh, you can understand how to structure your argument correctly. When you're doing a discussion in Hidayah, you understand how to structure your argument correctly. When you have a discussion in anything, because sometimes you have discussions with people, I've had the experience as well, is that we're discussing things like, your argument doesn't make sense. It's not that I'm always right. It's like, I get things wrong, but your method of arguing doesn't make sense. We don't even know what we're talking about. Like, you haven't really defined the term. Like, you have, for example, a whole long argument about Ismatul Anbiya. Can Anbiya commit sin or not? So, like, we have a whole discussion, and everybody doesn't even agree what does word sin mean. Like, what do you mean by sin? Someone think, getting angry is a sin. So they saying, how can, like, Anbiyas get angry, but that's not sin. So if you have a whole discussion of is Anbiya do not commit sin, what does even the word sin mean? Define that first. Then you can actually go on to then say, well, Anbiya don't commit sin or not. So many things that happen. You have so many discussions like bid'ah. So define the word bid'ah first before we even have a discussion on this. So this whole process is, and it happens even in, for example, in politics, in law, in the laws that are being passed. All of these, the whole point of this is to train your mind. If not really train it, perfect it, and so you understand what's being said, how to say things, how to structure arguments in a right way. So it's not Islamic, it's not un-Islamic. It's not like, it just basically allows you to study the sciences of Islam, especially when it comes to fiqh. They have more analysis, become more analytical, become more critical, able to actually think things through in a thorough way, in a proper way. So inshallah, this is what's Mantiq about. So three things. What are the three things? The single words, terms. So that's the first unit, terms. The second unit is what? The propositions, the statements. And the third is then basically the statements that we have, putting one or two or three or four of them together to derive new information. That's the three part. And then after, in between that, there's a lot more things to fill in. But that's the summary of what Mantiq's about. Yes? And it's very, very important. If you look at any of like people who have studied classically, this is very important to make sure that going forward in your discussions, in your debates, in your arguments, in your discussions, your derivations, your analogies, they all make sense. And then you come up with some weird stuff. So may Allah give us a bit of Subhanallah bihamdi subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.